Welcome to the Good Girl Deprogramming Podcast. You may not know it, but your whole life you've been living according to someone else's rules. Society's rules, history's rules, dare I say it, the patriarchy's rules. Well, now it's time to shake those rules off and live the life you choose. Authentically, unapologetically, joyously. I'm your host, Michelle Minikin, and my mission is to help you do just that. Each episode will explore stories, insights, and actionable steps to help you break free from good girl conditioning and step into your full power. Whether through candid conversations with inspiring guests or diving deep into each chapter of my book, together we're ripping up the rulebook and creating the change we want to see for women now and our daughters tomorrow. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Good Girl Deprogramming Podcast. I'm Michelle Minikin, your host, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here with me. This podcast is all about exploring good girl conditioning and how you break free from it. I'll introduce you to the concepts and ideas from my book, Good Girl Deprogramming, and together we'll head on a journey of discovery. So, what can you expect from this podcast? We'll have a mix of interviews with some fantastic prominent people who have broken free from rules, restrictions, or expectations to create a life that works for them, and solo episodes where I'll dive deep into each chapter of the book. We'll talk about societal expectations, breaking free from conditioning, and most importantly, how to reclaim your power and live life on your own terms. Now, let's get into this first episode. I'm going to start from the beginning so you're up to speed. And it starts with a story. I grew up in Northern Ireland near a reservoir. And when I was little, I used to say, I live by a reservoir, and it has a D-A-M on it. I would always spell the word damn because it felt naughty to say it out loud. I wanted to show that I was a good girl. As I grew up, despite being desperately shy, the need for validation and approval drove me. I started smoking to be liked by the cool kids. Fortunately, when I got to university, I had limited funds and cigarettes lost out to food. I threw myself into my studies. I wanted to get the top grades so people would be impressed, but try as I might, I just scraped by. Undeterred by my results, I carried on studying because of what I saw growing up in Northern Ireland. I was fascinated by why people did the things they did. So I chose psychology and ended up becoming an organisational psychologist. Then I got myself a job, house, husband, a couple of kids. A couple of cats. Didn't have a couple of kids. The kid comes later. The things we're supposed to do, and I was literally perfect. I was the exceptional employee at work, the fantastic friend, a brilliant sister, a delightful daughter, and a caring neighbour. On the outside, everything looked great, but inside I was unhappy, frustrated, and resentful. But I didn't really know why. So I carried on smiling. Then I got pregnant, and the fairy tale shattered. My marriage failed, and I became a single mum. So now I added perfect parent to the things I thought I needed to be, all the while attempting to hold down a full-time job. That's when the wheels really came off. I could barely keep my head above the water. I was struggling to keep up at work. I would put the child to bed and work every night. I was failing, and I was exhausted trying to keep up with everything and trying to make sure everything was perfect. My friends and family would see me struggling, and they would say, Michelle, you have no boundaries. You need to have boundaries, which made me seethe inside. Oh yes, of course. Just let me pop some boundaries into my Amazon basket. I knew I needed boundaries, but I had no clue how to get them. So, of course, I blamed myself for not being able to cope. I felt I wasn't good enough, and because of that, I kept quiet, and I didn't ask for help. And when anyone asked how I was, I just said, busy, busy, and carried on smiling. It all came to a head in 2016 when, for the first time, I mentioned to my then boss that I was not coping. She agreed and instantly lifted my workload. All of it. She sacked me. I honestly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I was numb. I was so burnt out that even the thought of applying for jobs and going to interviews made me want to puke. But I didn't have a choice. I'd got remarried and I was the main breadwinner. So in the end, I set myself up as an independent psychologist with my own practice. But things didn't get much better. My husband was panicking about money. So I ended up working more hours in my business than I had before for less money. And I started a side business with a friend. And I carried on smiling. For 2 long years, I careered from one crisis to another. And then I just couldn't carry on. I couldn't find my smile anymore. So in 2018, I reset my life. I got rid of all the pointless part-time jobs, told my business partner that we needed to call it quits, and showed husband number 2 the door. I did keep the child. I needed to do it my way. Fast forward a couple of years and life was better. The business was good and I had finally found my person and real love with James. In 2020, I was invited to a fancy International Women's Day breakfast celebration in the House of Lords. So you'll remember this was just as COVID was hitting the UK. We were in the you can do anything you want, but don't possibly hug phase. There I met this awesome woman, Anna Price, who told me about her recent ADHD diagnosis. That's when the penny dropped. It explained my chaotic life, my not quite living up to my potential, and the lot of things that I'd struggled with. I had my own ADHD diagnosis just before my 42nd birthday. I was relieved that I finally had an explanation, but I was surprised because alongside that relief was a feeling of white, hot anger. I felt cheated. What might my life have looked like if I'd known this information sooner? So, of course, I took myself off for therapy and coaching to deal with the rage. And after about a year, I was able to be a bit more rational about things. I knew what was down to me and what was down to my ADHD brain, and I was coping. But I was still terrified of conflict. I could not say no. I overplanned, I overprepared, and always deferred to authority. And the anger and resentment was still burning. There had to be something else going on besides ADHD. What was it? I didn't know. I couldn't figure it out, which is pretty silly given my profession. At the same time as all this was going on, I was doing a coaching course, and the trainer said to me the words "good girl conditioning." My brain went, wait, what? Could that be it? I had always tried to be a good girl at all costs. And suddenly the penny dropped. The problem was my good girl conditioning. So, what is this good girl conditioning? From childhood, women and girls are socialized to please others at the cost of their own well-being or needs. We are taught to be pretty, to smile, to be kind, to be nice, to share, cooperate, and care. We are judged on what we are, what we look like, and how we behave. It has a devastating impact on our lives, careers, relationship, and health. We're conditioned to believe that if something goes wrong, we are the problem. We over-apologize, avoid conflict, people please, and worry about what the people think of us. We are absolutely fucking knackered. A short time after my good girl conditioning light bulb moment, I was invited to contribute to the Women's Empowerment League as a part of an American L&D conference, where we co-created talks and sessions to help professional women with their careers. Thank you so much to Elizabeth Lemke for inviting me along. So, of course, I decided to speak about the effects of good girl conditioning, but I realised I hadn't fully understood how it happens to us. So, like the good psychologist I was, I went looking for answers. So during my research, I found out about a chap called Albert Biderman and his chart of coercion. You see, in the 1950s, during the Korean War, the US military were mortified that so many US prisoners of war were defecting to China. As you can imagine, this was during the McCarthy era, and communism was a very dirty word in that country. So they tasked They tasked who, Michelle? They tasked Biderman and his team with uncovering this magical mystery brainwashing machine. And what he found were the tactics of coercive control that effectively programmed US soldiers into Chinese communists. Biderman's work was used to describe torture by Amnesty International, and it's been applied to understanding domestic abuse. And here was I, 60 odd years later, asking the question, does this apply to how society keeps women and girls behaving? Within 30 minutes, I had printed his chart off and started considering if there were any relevant to what I had experienced. The three main strategies of coercion are: 1, social isolation, to keep people apart so they feel alone and less likely to resist. 2, strategic exhaustion, techniques to weaken mental and physical ability to resist. And 3, threats, real and implied threats of harm relating to non-compliance, which cultivate anxiety and despair. I was like, holy shit. Whether intentional or not, I believe that women and girls are kept in line through systemic and societal coercive control. Let's have a look at a couple of these and apply it to women. Social isolation. There is a lack of social support whilst also being taught to be independent, being raised to be superwomen and do everything on our own without asking for help, worrying what people think of us, our appearance, and our behaviour. Strategic exhaustion, being tired all the time. Our work adding so much to the world while being generally unrewarded. Also, the pressure to keep up with expectations on how we should look. And threats, being motivated by fear of judgment into staying small, staying in your lane, and not rocking the boat. So, with all this information, I created the talk, and it went down really well. And I just knew that I had to share this with more women so we could start figuring out our way out of this mess. So, the idea wouldn't go away, so I wrote a book about it, Good Girl Deprogramming. And writing the book deprogrammed me, just like the Barbie movie. I was transformed in subtle and some not so subtle ways. I was able to be much more authentic. I cared so much less about what others thought of me. I realized that it was none of my business. I could ask for help. Before this, I would have preferred to chew my own arm off than admit I was struggling. I mean, my big attempt at asking for help at work got me sacked. I was clearer about what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. I could, for the first time in my life, say no to things I didn't want to do. I found my communication became more direct, less apologetic, and was able to get more things done, both at work and at home. I was no longer terrified of being called a bitch. Some chapters of the book were significantly more painful than others to write. The one on strategic exhaustion took me 6 whole months, as I found that one particularly traumatizing. After writing the book, and it being so well received, I started being asked to deliver workshops in organisations to help women and other people recognise and start to think about their good girl conditioning in relation to the experience of work and what changes they can make. These workshops have been like live versions of the Everyday Sexism Project. I adore seeing women having light bulb moments of a realisation that so many of their colleagues have similar thoughts, feelings, and struggles. I have loved watching these groups of women open up and share, laugh, cry, and learn together, then go on to have closer, more authentic relationships with each other. But what has both surprised and delighted me is the reaction of men who have attended the workshops, the way they have respectfully listened with curiosity to their colleagues' experiences. Because, of course, men are also harmed by their conditioning. I love it. I get so much satisfaction in helping people come to their realizations about how this affects them and their lives and careers. So, do you want to know if you've been impacted by good girl conditioning? I've created a short quiz to help you discover how much of a good girl you might be. It's a fun and eye-opening way to see where you're at on your deprogramming journey. You can take the quiz by visiting goodgirlquiz.co.uk. I almost forgot what it was there. So what is the mission of this podcast? It's simple but profound. To help you deprogram from this good girl conditioning. We'll learn to say no, figure out and ask for what we want, and go after our dreams without shame or guilt. Together, we'll break free from the constraints and make this world a better place for ourselves and future generations. This podcast isn't just for women. We need men as allies in his journey too. One of my favourite moments was when a man ordered my book for his daughter to help her feel more empowered. We are all in this together. So what can you expect from this podcast? Each episode will cover different aspects of the book with practical strategies, personal stories, and plenty of humour, because we all need a good laugh, right? We'll meet some incredible guests who will share their insights and experiences of breaking free and unleashing the inner rebels. I am so excited for us to do this together. Remember, you do not need fixing. The system is stacked against us, but together we can change it. Let's peel off our masks, rediscover who we truly are, and start living life on our terms. Thank you for joining us on the Good Girl Deprogramming Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Together we can spread this message far and wide. Follow me on social media for more insights and updates. All the details are in the show notes. Take care, be kind to yourself, and remember, you are valuable, powerful, and deserve to live life on your own terms. Keep on deprogramming.